Who do you turn to when you can't express your vulnerability? Somebody that you trust and that you can be vulnerable around. And so that's how we automatically engage in lateral mentorship all the time. We're calling upon people that we know who can help us.
Mentorship isn't a box to check. It's also not a corporate initiative just to roll out. It's a deeply human exchange, one that only works when it's honest, unforced, and rooted in trust. Welcome to the Learn It All podcast, the show for today's leaders who want to get ahead and stay ahead because we believe great leaders aren't born or made, they are always in the making. I'm your host, Damon Lemby, and I'm joined today with my buddy and cohort, Darren Bridget, and we're from Learn It, a live learning platform that has helped upskill over 2 million people over the past 3 decades. In this episode, award-winning researcher, author, and founder of the Mentor Project, Dr. Deborah Heiser, is going to challenge everything we think we know about what it means to be a mentor. We're going to be asking Dr. Heiser to share her thoughts on the essential ingredients that makes mentorship actually work, why vulnerability is often the missing key to meaningful connection, and how to reframe mentorship, especially if you feel too busy or not qualified to be one. You have a lot of great stories in your book, The Mentorship Edge. Can you start off and just share one of your favorites?
I have so many. I'm going to start with this one. This one's a really kind of typical one, and it's about somebody that I think is one of our most prolific mentors at the Mentor Project. His name is Fred Klein. And Fred is a guy who is a complete extrovert. He'll talk to anyone. And he was going around his usual business, and this was back in the 80s. He went out to get his film developed. I don't know if anybody listening will remember film developing stores that were in the malls. Well, he went to one of those, and he happened upon a guy that he recognized he knew through his son. They went to high school together at the same time. And he was thinking to himself, my goodness, my son is like going to law school. This guy's in the film developing store. What's going on here? So he strikes up a conversation with this kid. And let me just do a little backtracking on the kid that I'm talking about. His name was Vinny. And Vinny was a guy who got in trouble no matter what he did. Like, he just walked outside his front door and he'd get in trouble. He had the most cuts of anyone in his high school. He, went about and did jobs where he saw how far he could push the line of doing the right thing and then would dip his toe onto the other side. So here's a guy who's had a lot of trouble going through school. He's at the film developing store, and Fred strikes up conversation with him every time he goes to the film developing store. And this guy, Vinny, starts to really trust Fred. And Fred sees something in this guy that is really making him drawn to him. So one day he says to Vinny, what the heck are you doing working in this film developing store? Why are you here? And the guy was like, well, I really want to be a photographer. And so Fred was like, well, then why aren't you out doing that? If I come back here in 5 years and you're still working here, you're going to be a loser. And that was like what he told this guy. And that was the aha moment for Vinny. Vinny went out and he became an actual real photographer for the NFL. He was down on the line. He actually followed his passion and his dream. He needed someone to say, go do it. Yeah. And he came back and he actually contacted Fred through his son and said, hey, I made it. I did it. And to this day, I was able to contact Vinny because they're still in touch. Vinny's written books. He's a successful entrepreneur. He's long past being a photographer, but his life was changed based on someone that he met at a place that was his work. He never knew that he was a mentor at the time. And Fred never thought of him as a mentee at the time. But these two interacted. They're still in touch like 45 years later. And the life of Vinny was seriously changed because of Fred. And it gives Fred such psychic gratitude, as Fred says, to know that he made that impact in his life.
You turn common understanding of mentorship on its head. And the way that we typically think about mentorship, there's really a lot of work that all of us can do to understand that in a more productive, deep way. So let's just start with, how do you define mentorship?
Well, I come from a psychologist perspective of this and research. So we hit a stage. I study aging, and we hit a stage in midlife called generativity. And it's where we're literally built to want to give back. It's actually a life stage. It's not like some made up thing. And it's been researched. It was posited by Eric Erickson. And it's where you care for someone without expecting anything in return. And we're all aware of this. If anyone has had children, when the baby cries, you don't go, oh, you better, pay me back later for this, that I'm rocking you to sleep tonight. This is something that we're all sort of built to do. But in midlife, we're hitting a stage where we want to say, okay, all those boxes I checked, do they matter? Do I have a footprint in the world? Do I matter? And it's really a point where some people say this is the midlife crisis. Really, it's a stage of generativity, though. So when we look at mentorship, it has to come that somebody wants to give something of themselves to somebody else. So in the case of Fred, he wanted to give his advice to Vinny, to say, here's some practical stuff that you can do. I believe in you, that sort of a thing. And Vinny had to want that from Fred, and he did. The next thing is it has to be something that is intrinsically motivated. And that means that if I were to say to you, hey, Darren, hey, Damon, would you like to go volunteer your time at a soup kitchen? You might say, yeah, I'd really like that. It makes me feel very good to do that. If you were on your way and I said, hey, before you get there, just turn left and go volunteer your time at Starbucks, that's a whole different feeling. You expect something extrinsic like pay from Starbucks, and it makes you feel icky if you're the one not getting paid there, doing the same as everybody else. So that same act feels different. And we also need a meaningful connection. Now, Fred knew Vinny from the film developing store. It wasn't like they hung out on the weekends and things like that, but they both felt meaningfully connected. They're still connected today. So we need that. If you're meeting with somebody and you're going, oh, I've got to meet with my mentor today, that's not really great. And we also need to trust the person. So that happens all the time where this component is left out, where if I'm an entrepreneur and I say, oh, I don't want to tell Damon about, this area of expertise I have because he's going to run away with that information and go start his own company. Or I might say, I don't want to tell Darren what I don't know because I feel vulnerable. He's a couple levels above me. And you know what? Yeah, he might not give me a raise. He might even say, oof, I now have a whole new outlook on this person. And finally, we need a goal. So what we know in mentorship is a lot of times it looks like mentorship. Just like if I made brownies and I left the sugar out, it's going to look like it, but it's not going to taste like it. Mentorship, if you leave out the trust component, you leave out the intrinsic motivation, it's going to look like it, but it won't work. And that's what we see a lot of times in companies and organizations is that they're leaving out one of the components that really is a key for mentorship to actually work the way it should.
To get back to how you made this journey, you started in a totally different field. You were actually looking at kind of psychology and aging and frailty. And you have a cool story about making that turn.
I was looking at it the way that we all think about it, which is an inverted V. We have a steep, steady incline while we're young. This is our physical trajectory. And then we have a slow, steady decline as we age. Like I didn't need these glasses when I was younger. I always tell my students, you can outrun me. However, what we're not thinking of is that we also have an emotional trajectory. The first one I talked about is super scary. The second one, though, is our emotional trajectory, and it goes up and doesn't go down. So I can not run as fast as my students, but I'm happier. So that's what I tell them all the time. And that's really how that trajectory works. I studied depression. That was one of the areas that I was really looking at and studying quite a bit. So most people say, well, what about people who get depressed when they get older? Yeah, they do, but they're the outliers. We should not expect to be depressed. We should not expect to have Alzheimer's disease. We should not expect those. Those are out there. Can it happen? Yes. But we shouldn't expect it. So, and can you get depressed and then get better? Yes, you can. But the expectation that people had was that everyone should be depressed. And that was what got me, because I said, I don't want people to think that. I want them to expect to be happy, which is the trajectory that we do follow. And that was where everybody was sort of challenging the thought that, no, we should be depressed. We should be frail. We should have Alzheimer's. We should be afraid of our future. So sorry, that was a long answer to that.
And I appreciated that you said that, and of course, all that led to generativity, which seems like one of the cornerstones for you when it comes to mentorship. Can you explain what generativity is and how is it different from generosity and other ways that we might think about it?
So generativity is generating something from you. So we are all like walking libraries. So, if I don't get my information out, it's like burning down a library. I have an expertise in whatever I have, you do. It's how we all are. And so we get compelled to want to generate that expertise out and put it into the world, into somebody else. You're doing that through your podcast. We do that in all sorts of ways. You're doing a modern form of mentorship with that. So that is generativity. Think of generating, it lives on outside of me. Now, generosity is I go to an ice cream shop and I say, "Ooh, I'd like a scoop of ice cream, please." And they give me an extra scoop. That's generous. But then I eat it and it's gone. And that's the difference between that. Now, reciprocity is I'll scratch my back, or I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back. There's something there that is, if I do this, I'm expecting something in return from you that is going to match that. And so if we think of generosity as being generative, it stops there. It doesn't live on. And we want to be generative. We want to make sure that we are generating a piece of us that will live on in you and the next person and the next person.
If I'm somebody listening and I'm thinking to myself, I'm not that generative right now, and I need to get better at it, what advice would you have for them?
I'd say you probably are generative and you don't know it, because most of us are. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. I was in graduate school, and again, this was the olden days. Cell phones were big and bulky, and they cost like $10 if you made a call on them. I get a call on my cell phone, and I know that this is a big deal because nobody called anybody because they knew it was a lot of money. I take the phone call, and my classmate said, "Hey, I'm on my externship, and I have a big project to do. And I remember, Kappa statistics. Can you teach me Kappa statistics right now? Because I'm going to have to give this project later. And, these are a big deal, when you're in graduate school." So I walked her through it and I taught her Kappas. And she did great. Off she went, and she went on and on. Have you ever helped anybody when they asked for help like that? You probably have. That's generative. What I taught her didn't go away. She didn't go write it down and then it was gone. And she's done that for me. So we do this sort of thing. If a neighbor calls and they say, "Oh my gosh, I need help with something or other. Can you teach it to me? Can you show me how?" You're doing it. You're being generative right now with the podcast. So we do these things all the time in our everyday life, but we don't even give ourselves credit for it. Another thing that's generative that people do and they don't realize is religion, tradition, values, culture. Religion didn't pop out of a box. It's been something that for centuries has had similarities that get passed down. It doesn't matter which one it is. And the traditions, every time you go to a holiday dinner, it's not like somebody's like, "Ooh, we're going to do this theme. It's going to be a whole different scenario." It's those familiar traditions that you then pass on that continue something. And so you're doing it. You're being generative all the time.
Sharing knowledge and wisdom along with other things like trust and intrinsic motivation, which I think gets us into what you think about mentorship in a workplace setting, what everybody gets wrong. Can you talk about that a little bit?
A lot of people really don't like it when I say that, mentorship in the workplace is often, I think of it as a burden almost, when it's set up where a person is supposed to be inspiring and there's that if they have to show that they are mentoring, that just becomes another part of the job. And that to me feels like a burden. And I'll explain a little bit about what I mean. I teach a university and I tell the students, "I am not your mentor. I am your advisor right now. I get paid to work with you." Now, When I do that, I want the best for you. I want you to do really, really well. All of those components that would go into mentoring, I'm going to be doing that, but I'm paid to do this as an advisor to you. If I don't do it, I'm a bad advisor. It's not that I'm not a mentor. I'm a bad advisor. I'm bad at helping you. So when we're in the workplace and we're saying we're now going to put another word on that and call it mentorship, but you're really at Starbucks instead of at the soup kitchen, it feels like an ick. It feels like I've got one more box I've got to check at work and I'm supposed to be like nice and feel altruistic about it. The logic and the emotion don't go together. So a lot of places can engage in really great mentorship that's more organic. And places do this all the time automatically. People just don't capitalize on it. So if you're in a healthcare setting, a doctor can't go to another doctor and be like, hey, I'm getting ready to do surgery. I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, that's not going to go well. But they can do a curbside consult and say, hey, can I pick your brain? I have this thing coming up and I just want to make sure how did you handle that? And that's mentorship. You're getting that mentorship. That is a grand rounds. That is the lunch where people are brought together and they brown bag it. And this happened actually in the federal courts in Iowa, where the federal judges set up informal lunches so that, you can't be like, oh, I have a case coming up. No clue how to do that. This is another one of those that you're not going to go tell people, but you will say, hey, Jim, you had the case like this. Can you tell me how that ran? Now, that's a whole different feel to people than it is if somebody says, you are now Jim's mentee and you are going to now be mentored by him. I still may feel like I don't trust telling Jim, or maybe I don't even like Jim. Maybe Jim's somebody that I don't feel meaningfully connected with. So when we impose some of those things on people, it backfires in some ways, or it waters it down and it doesn't make it so that it's really working. I would just name it something else. We're going to have workplace advisory. We're going to have some workplace coaching. We're going to have something else. Because when a person is labeling something as mentorship, it stops a person from going and actually getting mentorship because they think they're already engaging in it.
Interesting. So you're saying that if it feels like it's imposed instead of organic, that it actually backfires and can be detrimental. Can you give an example of how does it make it detrimental?
I'm going to tell you a case that somebody almost died. Okay, so
That's a good one.
imagine it's 2003 and you are watching the Columbia Space Shuttle hurtling back to Earth and it disintegrates on impact with Earth's atmosphere. Now, that was to the horror of everyone watching. A couple years later, 2005, they send up another mission, STS-114. And imagine you're the astronaut and you're like, woohoo, this is great. I'm in space finally. Yay, this is great. And then you get a call from Mission Control. And Mission Control is like, hey, you might have that same problem that the other mission had. And imagine yourself being that astronaut. Well, Charlie Camarda was that astronaut who got that call. Now, the people that he was working with were supposed to be his mentors. They were supposed to be guiding him through everything. He didn't trust them. He was like, they don't know what's going on. They can't tell me what's really happening. So what he did was he got out his little black book. I did not know they do this in space, but he had his little black book of contacts, and he contacted a lateral mentor, a person that he considered a trusted colleague who knew exactly this kind of mission and what was happening. And he said, listen, do I have to call my daughter and say I'm not coming home? He was a single dad taking care of his daughter. And he said, do I have to do that? Or is there a way to get home safely? And the guy worked with him and he mentored him through and said, here's what I think. Because, he has to teach him while he's there and incorporate his expertise into Charlie. He can't go there and do it for him. So he said, you got to do a spacewalk and fix this teeny tiny tile that's outside, which was what caused the demise of the previous shuttle. So Charlie calls Mission Control and says, hey, we're going to do a spacewalk. And they did it and they came home safely. Now, that is where the breakdown happened. He didn't trust that person. Those people, he was assigned to work with them. He didn't trust them. He didn't feel that there was any, intrinsic motivation coming from that. This was work. And he felt like, I think they put me in a bad spot here. And that's when he swapped it out for somebody who he did trust and who was intrinsically motivated to help him. His name isn't even mentioned. He was just somebody that who wanted to help because he cared about him. If it's imposed to you that I am supposed to divulge all of my secrets to you, it's like a therapist. Imagine going to a therapist that you don't like or trust. You think that that person's going to go tell your story to everybody. Would you really tell them? Even they can have that title, but is that really going to work? So this is the kind of.
But if you have a mentorship program, like a lateral mentorship sort of with somebody that you trust and it's intrinsic and you can go back and forth, that's the kind of thing that you're talking about building.
Yeah, absolutely. You can have a formal mentoring program. You just have to make sure that the people want to be there, they want to be doing it, and that they want to be engaged in it. So, if, for example, with the Mentor Project, we're a formalized mentoring organization, but we'll have kids, and I say that loosely, they're all the way through graduate school students who will meet with a mentor and we'll say, I want to put you with 5, not just the one you think you want. And we say failed, it's not a failed relationship if you say this isn't working for me, the mentor or the mentee. That's not a failure. It's just not mentorship. So then they can find their person in both directions. And that's really what we need, because when we have a one-to-one matching system, we aren't guaranteed. You could have a whole lot of people that come in front of you that are potential friends, but are you friends with everybody who crosses your path? No, you know who you want to be friends with. You don't need a handbook on that. And if somebody said now you're going to be friends with somebody that you just met that you don't really care that much about, you're never going to be really close.
Sticking with the mentorship project, what I really like is, we talk about, well, people aren't going to want to help. You're never going to be able to get people to do things for free, but you've really proved that otherwise. I think it's incredible. Let's talk a little bit about where are some of these people coming from who are the mentors and all the work and help that they're doing. Cause I think it's incredible.
It surprised me. I will tell you that I thought to myself, is this generativity thing real? Because, it has been studied in small little bits and in different ways, but this was going to be like an anthropological expedition to look at this. So when we started with just a few people, it was Bill Cheswick who said, I'm going to be leaving Bell Labs. He's one of the fathers of the network firewall. And he said, I'm retiring and I'm going to move to a farm. And I'm not going to have any kids around to mentor. And I can't go to a park and say, hey, kid, do you want to mentor? It's not going to work out well. So I was like, ooh, let's see if we can just get you in with kids. And so a few of us got together just thinking this would be fun. There was no real big anything there. And Bill went out to schools and he was having a blast. A couple of other really cool people went out to some schools and they were having fun. And then somebody said to me, you do know that no one else is ever going to do this. You are essentially a band of 10 weirdos out there doing this. And I was like, that's okay. We're just going to do it. It's working. Everybody's happy and we're having a good time. And then within 6 months, we went to 60 mentors, 80 and 100. This was not me knocking on doors saying, hey, would you like to mentor? This was people saying, I need to do this. And we still have people all the time saying, I'd like to mentor. And these are people that I was told wouldn't want to do it because they're the top 1%. Charlie, the astronaut. We have a very well-known artist. We have a 7-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee. We have astrophysicists who you would see on television on PBS and Nova and all of that. We have all of these really recognizable individuals who have said, I want to give back and I need to. And the weird thing is that they always say, we said, oh, we'll start it slow, that maybe they don't want to give too much of their time, 2 hours a month. No, they say we want more and more and more. And so it really was able to prove that when we look at mentorship from the perspective of the mentor, not the elusive, faceless person that we're saying, go find a mentor so I can grab my way up the ladder. If we say, let's flip it and look at it from the mentor perspective, which is what the Mentor Project is. Here are all these people with information to give. Who wants it? Now you have a much more meaningful potential matching because somebody's saying, I like what that person does. That's my area. ooh, that's interesting, or I've never heard of that. I'd like to meet with that person. So it changes, it shifts it from being burdensome to the mentor and more of a journey that the mentee gets to say, this is the one I want to be on. And we served last year and we had to take a little hiatus as we changed our platform. We gave out more than $3 million of mentorship hours to students in 5 countries based on 100% volunteer work from these amazing mentors. So it's really defining mentorship, generativity in a modern way by them doing that.
What does the future hold when it comes to mentorship?
Unbelievably amazing. So, like I've said a couple of times now, you guys are modern mentors. We were on Skype in 2019, and that was like you met with people in person, or when you did Skype, it was like, "Ooh, I'm gonna be doing Skype today, like, clear the house, here we go." And it was a big deal. But people get on now all the time, and they're able to connect with people everywhere, and it's a really great platform for that. We have AI that's, allowing us to have bots that people can give mentorship through that platform. So I know that like the Holocaust Museum has, people who were survivors who tell their story. They're long gone, but their story lives on through that bot that it looks like a real person speaking to them. We're seeing more of those. Marshall Goldsmith, who's a coach, he has a Marshall bot that is giving out coaching mentorship to coaches. When we see a person who's doing podcasting, that is a way of getting out information that we did not have that ability. Radio didn't have that same ability to reach people globally because it was a community-based thing. The radio waves don't go that far. But now we're seeing that people are picking up on ideas and new ways of thinking around the world that were just 5 years ago kept to a local community. And that's where I think that I don't even know what the new tech is going to be, but I'm very excited because I think it's going to really propel us with regard to mentorship.
Speaking of the lateral, would you, because I know that that's kind of that interesting area for you, would you tell the Steve story?
Imagine you're at work, and this has happened to me before. This happened to a lot of people. You're at work and your boss comes to you and says, I have an impossible task for you, and it has to be done in an impossibly short amount of time. So this guy, Steve, says to his boss, sure, I got it. No problem. He didn't, but he wasn't going to tell his boss that because he didn't want to get fired. He was sure he'd get fired. This was a startup, and he knew that the company's future was hinging on this. So his boss comes in a couple of days later and he says, hey, Steve, how's it going? And Steve says, don't worry, I got it. Well, he didn't. So he called his friend Steve on the phone. And he said, Steve, I know you know a different kind of engineering than I know. Can you walk me through this? And Steve said, you know what? I'll meet you after work. When I get done with work, I'll come and I'll see what's going on. He comes late that night and they're working together, and it's like Rumpelstiltskin entered the room. They are turning wheat into gold. So the next day, the boss comes back and goes, Steve, this looks great. You seem to be getting this work done. How's it going? Were you going to get it done on time? And Steve's like, I told you I had it. I totally have it. And he's like, Steve, can you come back? Steve comes back that night after night. Steve's coming back and they're working until the wee hours. No one knows Steve's friend Steve is coming at night. It's happening after hours. And then Steve leaves. Steve goes home. Steve comes back to work. Anyway, they finish it a week early. This impossible task with an impossibly short deadline gets finished a week before its due date. And the boss says, oh my gosh, you saved the company. Well, that company was Atari. The boss was Al Alcorn, who's known as the grandfather of video games. The project that was being worked on was Breakout, the first video game for Atari. And the two Steves, Steve Jobs held the job, and Steve Wozniak was his friend who was the lateral mentor. Now, should people say to their boss, I don't know what I'm doing? I don't know if that's the moral of the story here. All I'm saying is I know so many people who've done that. They don't feel like they can express their vulnerability. And who do you turn to when you can't express your vulnerability? Somebody that you trust and that you can be vulnerable around. And so that's how we automatically engage in lateral mentorship all the time. We're calling upon people that we know who can help us. And that story was funny because when Al Alcorn was telling it to me, he was like, man, Steve Jobs totally exploited Steve Wozniak. And I was like, come on, haven't you ever helped a friend? And so the story that got out there about that was the exploitation of Steve Wozniak because nobody knew that he was helping him. But that's really how we operate it when we're generative. We're a little walking library. And when somebody that we care about says, I need your help, we say, let me open up the door to the library, and we give it to them. We don't expect something in return.
Deborah, so many great stories, and I love how you tie it back to your work as well. And we're kind of coming up here on time, but if I'm a listener out here and I want to be a mentor to more individuals, what advice would you have for me to go out and seek and find mentees?
So I would first say you probably have them around you. Look to your left and look to your right. Most of us have people around us, just like, with Fred, who went into the film developing store. They are everywhere. It's just that most of us look past people. We don't really look and say, is there some way I can be of help to them? Or is there some way they can be of help to me? And not in a way like, oh, I'm looking for reciprocity here, but looking a little bit more deeply into that person. And as we form those Rolodexes, that person may be the person that saves your life in the future. That person may be someone that you saved their life or their career or whatever it might be. So it's really looking at people all around us as a potential, meaningful connection for us.
Amazing, really interesting perspective on what mentorship really means in a big picture way. If you're interested, everybody should go read the book because there's a lot of more great stories and more refined ways to understand it, including things we get into like the legacy tree, which is fascinating. Deborah, I'm gonna check my impulse to give advice, build a little more trust as I go out and do it.
I love that. I think that I'm so glad you brought that up because I didn't mention that, and I don't even think I touched on that in the book. Don't just run out and give advice. We have to know that person wants to receive it. And that's the generativity part, that you have to have the person who wants to generate, but you really have to make sure that person is the one that wants to receive it. Because nobody really, like you said, wants to have somebody come over and just tell them something. It feels pushy or it doesn't feel, really caring. It feels more like criticism.
If our listeners want to learn more about your work, what's the best way to connect with you at?
Sure. Go to the Mentor Project, and especially if you know of a student who needs a mentor, it's free. It costs nothing. And you get access to all these, top 1% leaders in their fields. Click the button, become a mentee, and fill out the form, and off you go. But if you want to learn more about me, you can check me out there. I write for Psychology Today. I have a website, deborahheiser.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can reach me through wherever you buy books, because you can find me through the Mentorship Edge as well.
Thank you. So everybody, you should pick up Deborah's book, but I also want you to do me a favor. Think about somebody who you think could either be a great mentor or maybe knows people who could benefit from this conversation, and maybe even has a kid who's could be a potential mentee, maybe somebody in school, and take this conversation we had and send it to them. And so thank you so much, Deborah. And until next time, everybody, stay curious, keep learning, and have a great day.
Very seldom do we believe that if I leave a comment on your video, that your video is going to comment back. And yet, when I read something from you and I comment, I do